Pearse Doherty.
Minister, in a report published today or yesterday by KBC Bank, they say that it expects the average household to be €2,000 worse off this year as a result of the cost of living crisis. And this is going to hit lower and middle income earners hardest. Yesterday, the Central Bank told me at committee that they expected that household bills are already €1,300 higher than they were this time last year, and they see that there will be an additional cost for food of about €600 for the average household this year. Minister, workers and families can't bear these costs without significant financial hardship, and we already know that many families are already facing difficulties. According to the CEO of Alone, an organisation that advocates for older people are choosing whether to use their money to keep the heating on or to actually buy food. That's the situation that they find themselves in. And young people are also confronted with similar choices. And these are choices that nobody should have to make. The war in Ukraine has turbocharged inflation and rising prices, but we have been in the grips of a high inflation since the second half of last year, with energy prices spiking while households were already facing unaffordable rents and housing costs. Now, in their quarterly bulletin published yesterday, the ESRI now expects inflation to average at 6.7% this year, and the Central Bank expects it to peak at 9% by summer. So rising prices, Minister, doesn't affect everybody equally. They hit lower-income households the hardest. And workers and families need support, and they need support now to weather the costs of the living crisis. Without it, they face massive difficulties, and many will be forced into poverty. We recognise fully that households can't be fully insulated from the full effects of rising prices, but the government can and must and should do more to support them. Last week, you personally, Minister, ruled out any measures to provide additional supports to households until October. Minister, that is not credible. It is simply wrong. It is not the step that you should be taking as Finance Minister. These individuals need additional support. The government has a responsibility, and you, Minister, as Minister for Finance, have a responsibility to act. As a result of rising prices this year, those in receipt of social welfare payments are significantly worse off this year than they were last year. And you shouldn't stand over this. It involves some of the most vulnerable in our society seeing the sharpest cuts in their living standards, the sharpest cuts in their ability to provide basic necessities for themselves and for their families, and that is the reality that they face. For months, we in Sinn Féin have been calling on your government to respond to this reality and to increase core social welfare rates in response to rising prices. But you have ruled it out time and time again, and just last week you have ruled it out at least until the budget. We also know that some households are more at risk from poverty than others. Over a third of households in this state use home heating oil as the primary fuel source to heat their homes. In border counties such as my own, 2/3 of households rely on it. Last week, the cost of filling a tank reached over €1,600, and many households simply cannot afford this increase without cutting back on other essentials, and that's what's happening in the real world. We in Sinn Féin have called on your government to remove excise duty on home heating oil, to ease the burden for those households, and taken almost €100 off the cost of a tank fill. But you have ruled it out. You have voted against it. So I'm asking you to act, as Minister for Finance, to act to protect those who are most vulnerable, to protect workers and families from the sharpest edge of these inflationary increases. So I'm asking you, will you change your position? Will you now contemplate other supports for workers and families who are hardest hit? Will you look at a social welfare package to support those who are most vulnerable? And will you remove excise from home heating oil?
Thank you very much, Lascam Corla. The government is absolutely aware of the anxiety, the additional cost that so many across our country are facing at the moment due to the rise in energy prices. That is mostly being caused by what is happening in the war in Ukraine. We are aware of the worry that many now are contending with as they see their bills go up, due to the rising price of food, due in turn to the food consequences and the raw material consequences of what is now happening in that awful, awful war. But it is precisely in recognition of the additional costs that so many are facing that the government has already acted. The government, since we brought in last year's budget, has already acted on 2 separate occasions. We have brought in measures that are now in the process of being implemented to make a difference. We have brought in the additional payment of €125 for those who are most at risk of energy poverty. We have brought in and will shortly see implemented the €200 rebate in relation to electricity bills, and only a number of weeks ago have brought in additional measures in relation to the price of fuel at the pump, and also other measures to try to help with the cost of living, which we know is building. Now, Deputy Doherty made reference to the ESRI report and to the growth, to the inflation forecasts that are included in the report. That same report made the point that as we move into dealing with this latest crisis, we'll move into dealing with it with an economy that is growing, with 2.5 million people at work, and with flexibility and the capacity for the government to respond back to the latest test, to the latest challenge, which our country, our people and our economy must rise to. And one of the reasons we are in a position to do this is while we were dealing with the challenges of the last number of years, we did our best each day to do all we could as a government and to act in a sensible way while being conscious that that challenge is one that could be with us and indeed was with us for some time. It's the same now with where we are at the moment, Lascam Corla. We face a crisis, the duration of which is uncertain, due to forces which Deputy Doherty, in fairness to him, has acknowledged are outside the control of our country. And this government needs the ability and needs the capacity to be able to respond back to all of the additional costs, all of the additional needs that we will need to respond back to. And we are. €800 million of additional measures since budget day, €1 billion of measures on budget day to help with the rising cost of living, and we will help. But Deputy Doherty is raising this while at the same time your own party in Northern Ireland have just voted through a rate increase in local councils. So your party, in decisions that you have made in Northern Ireland, for example, in Mid-Ulster, have now increased the rates bill that families will pay, that ratepayers will pay, by 3.9%. Now, I assume the reason why your colleagues in Northern Ireland are doing that is they're facing the same pressures and the same challenges that we are here. They're trying to find ways in which they can raise money to respond back to the challenges that their constituents and communities have and to the challenges they know are approaching. So that's the decision that your party is making in Northern Ireland at the moment, the very kind of decision which this government at the moment is trying to avoid. And instead what we are doing is bringing forward measures which we know from many won't insulate, won't cover them from all of the costs that they are now facing, but will help, and we are determined to ensure they're swiftly implemented and determined to stand by and do what we can to help the Irish people during this latest crisis and test that we will rise to.
Minister, you talk about understanding the anxieties that's out there. Well, let me tell you this. The people that I represent, the people I speak to, their anxiety levels went through the roof when they saw you on their television screens saying, let me be clear, I am not planning any additional measure to support you, your household, your family until at least the budget. And that was on the same day that Bord Gas increased their costs of gas by up to 40%, electricity by nearly 30%, and other suppliers are going to follow suit. You talk about what you've done. Don't listen to me for a second. Listen to St Vincent de Paul. They said it's not enough. Social Justice Ireland saying it's not enough. Those who advocate for older people alone saying it's not enough. You need to do more. People who are dependent on social welfare are poorer now, and they're wondering, how am I going to get that extra hundreds of euro to heat my home or to put food on the table for me and my family? They're looking for government who have a responsibility to act in the national interest and to protect those that are most vulnerable from this spike in inflation. You're refusing to act. You have the power, you have the ability to act now. Instead of increasing home heat and oil, which you plan to do on the 1st of May, let's reduce it. Instead of actually ignoring the plight of those who are most vulnerable, let's bring forward a social welfare package that protects them for the most particular increase. That's what I would do, Minister, if I was sitting on your side.
Minister, please, just thank you. Okay, can we just comply with the time? Thank you. Minister.
This is a government that from the moment this crisis tested our country again has acted quickly, just as we did when we were contending with the last crisis of 2 years ago. We will be so determined to do what we can at each point to offer that help. Deputy, I'm well aware of the worry, of the anxiety, of the concern that many are facing at the moment. I meet them in my own clinics, I meet them in my constituency work, just as all of my government colleagues do. We are aware of the challenges and the new tests that we will respond back to. But I didn't hear any word from you about the measures and increases that your party is implementing in Northern Ireland. Didn't hear any acknowledgement from you in relation to that, not a single word. The difference between the deputies on this side of the House and you, Deputy Doherty, and your colleagues is this government is busy trying to implement measures that we believe can make a difference. We are busy implementing measures to try to help. Deputy Doherty, you're busy deleting your policies, deleting the measures. That's what you're doing. We're acting on recent decisions. We're acting in our recent policy. All of you are too busy deleting them.
Nothing till October.
We're over time.
Disgraceful.
Thank you. If we could, I am moving on.